A culinary collision on a battle-scarred continent. In the final, convulsive year of the Second World War, as the Allied juggernaut swept across Western Europe, a peculiar and deeply human drama unfolded not on the front lines, but in the chow lines of hastily erected prisoner camps. The actors were an unlikely group, thousands of German women, captured while serving in the Wehrmacht's auxiliary branches. The setting was a series of transient enclosures, from repurposed German barracks to fenced-off town squares, now administered by the advancing American forces. The prop that would catalyze a moment of profound cultural reassessment was deceptively simple, ubiquitous, and to its recipients, initially revolting, a grilled cob of corn. For these weary, apprehensive women, Luftwaffe communications auxiliaries, anti-aircraft helpers, nurses, and clerks, capitulation brought a maelstrom of emotions, relief at survival, fear of reprisal, and the gnawing uncertainty of their fate. They braced for hostility, for deprivation, perhaps even for brutality. What they did not brace for was being offered, by their conquerors, what they firmly believed to be livestock feed. This is not merely a tale of unfamiliar cuisine, it is a story of perceptual shattering. The journey from disgust to delight, from seeing a symbol of barbarism to tasting a morsel of unexpected humanity, encapsulates a microcosm of post-war reconciliation. Their reaction, preserved in interviews and memoirs, speaks volumes about the power of sensory experience to dismantle propaganda, challenge deep-seated cultural certainties, and plant the first, fragile seeds of peace. Stay with this account, for within this seemingly trivial anecdote lies a profound lesson about how war divides, and how the most fundamental human needs, like food, can begin to bridge those chasms. The captives, Germany's Kriegshelferinnen, in Allied hands. To understand the depth of their shock, one must first understand the women themselves. By 1944, with Germany's manpower crisis acute, the Nazi regime had mobilized its female population on an unprecedented scale. These were not frontline combat troops in the modern sense. Nazi ideology famously reserved direct combat for men, but they were integral to the war machine. Known as Kriegshelferinnen, war helpers, or Blitzmädchen, lightning girls, often for Luftwaffe auxiliaries, they took on roles that freed men for the front. They operated complex switchboards in bunkers, relaying orders that determined the movements of armies. They manned rangefinders and spotlights for anti-aircraft batteries, their faces lit by the eerie glow of searchlights probing the night skies for Allied bombers. They served as nurses in field hospitals, tending to the mangled victims of a war that was now crashing back upon the fatherland. They were clerks, typists, and administrators, the unseen cogs that kept the bureaucratic engine of war turning. Many were young, in their late teens or early 20s, drawn from a society saturated for over a decade with National Socialist ideology. Their worldview had been shaped by propaganda that glorified German culture, efficiency, and racial purity while caricaturing enemies, particularly the Americans, as decadent, uncultured, and inferior. Their capture was often as chaotic as the retreating German lines. Some were overrun in their barracks or workstations as American tanks rolled into their towns. Others were rounded up in the aftermath of battle, their uniforms identifying them as part of the military apparatus. The transition from being a component of the Reich's defense to becoming a prisoner of war, POW, was abrupt and disorienting. American GIs, following protocol, processed them and transported them to temporary holding areas, designated as P camps for prisoners. Fear was a constant companion. They had heard Goebbels's warnings about the Jewish Bolshevik and gangster Americans. They expected the worst. The setting, P camps and American field kitchens. The camps that received them were a far cry from the grim stalags of the Eastern Front or the notorious concentration camps. American logistical pragmatism dictated their nature. They were functional, secure, and temporary. A typical camp might be a former Wehrmacht training ground, its parade grounds now hosting rows of tents. It could be a hastily fenced field on the outskirts of a liberated French village, or a section of a town cordoned off with barbed wire. Conditions were basic but generally adequate, focused on containment, processing, and eventual transfer to British or French authorities for final internment. The most defining and consistently astonishing feature of these camps, from the prisoners' perspective, was the food supply. The United States Army, a logistical behemoth, fed its own troops remarkably well by wartime standards. This abundance extended, in a more limited but still startling form, to their prisoners. American field kitchens, mobile, efficient, and stocked from the seemingly bottomless reserves of the American homeland, began dispensing rations, for the German women, raised in a nation where years of blockade, rationing, and total war had made scarcity a way of life. The sight was bewildering. White bread, soft and plentiful, not the coarse, dark Kriegsbrot, war bread, stretched with sawdust or potato flour. Coffee that was real, or at least a potent approximation. Meats, sweets, and fruits that seemed like relics of a pre-war past. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared them for the corn. The shock, das ist Schweinefutter. That is pig feed. The moment of culinary collision is vividly recounted in multiple survivor testimonies. Lining up with their mess tins, the women, still in their worn service dresses or civilian clothes, coats draped against the chill, watched the American cook serve up the day's meal. And there it was, grilled corn on the cob. The cobs were bright yellow, their kernels glistening with melted butter or margarine, charred in places from the grill, emitting a sweet, smoky, unfamiliar aroma. A wave of palpable confusion, then murmured disgust, rippled through the line. In the German agricultural tradition of the time, corn, maize, held a specific and unequivocal role. It was Tierfutter, animal feed. It was grown in fields to be chopped into silage for cattle or fed whole to pigs. It was not considered fit for human consumption. To eat corn was, in their cultural lexicon, to descend to the level of livestock. It was a marker of poverty, backwardness, or sheer desperation. Whispers broke out, was Saul das? What is that, die Geben uns Schweinefutter? They are giving us pig feed. Some women took the proffered cob gingerly, holding it by the very tip as if it were contaminated. Others placed it warily on the edge of their trays, a yellow insult next to the other, more recognizable items. Their faces were masks of disbelief. Was this a deliberate humiliation? A sign of American ignorance? A tasteless joke? The women exchanged glances heavy with meaning. Here was proof, it seemed, of the propaganda. The Americans were so uncultured, so barbaric, they didn't even know what people were supposed to eat. The American GIs and cooks observed this reaction with a mixture of bewilderment and amusement. To them, corn on the cob was a staple of backyard barbecues, state fairs, and summer picnics, a food of celebration and comfort. One cook, perhaps trying to be reassuring, perhaps mildly offended, reportedly took a demonstrative, enthusiastic bite from a cob, smiling and chewing with gusto as if to say, "See? It's good." This gesture, however, only deepened the German women's suspicion. It confirmed that this was not a mistake, but what the Americans actually intended for them to eat. The first bite, a threshold crossed. Back at their makeshift seating areas, on benches, crates, or the ground, the women confronted the corn. An initial standoff ensued. They ate the other items on their trays, saving the strange cob for last, poking at it with forks, studying its geometric rows of kernels. Hunger, a constant in wartime Europe, eventually wrestled with cultural revulsion. Invariably, in each group, one woman, driven by greater curiosity, exhaustion, or simple hunger, would sigh, lift the cob, and, with an expression of profound reluctance, take a small, cautious bite. The testimonies consistently highlight the instantaneous nature of the revelation. Her eyes would widen, not in disgust, but in surprise. The sensory experience was utterly disconnected from expectation. The kernels were sweet, a natural sugar caramelized by the grill's heat. The butter added a rich, savory creaminess. The slight char provided a smoky depth. The texture was a pleasing combination of juiciness and a gentle pop. It was warm, comforting, and fundamentally delicious. This was not coarse, dry animal feed, it was a genuinely delightful food. She would take another, more confident bite. The women around her watched this transformation intently. Seeing no sign of distress, only growing enjoyment, a second would try, then a third. Slowly, then all at once, the resistance crumbled. The camp air, once thick with disdainful whispers, now carried the quiet sounds of chewing and, soon, soft exclamations of surprise. Es ist sus. It's sweet, eigentlich ganz gut. Actually quite good. Some even laughed, a release of tension, laughing at their own earlier prejudice and at the sheer unexpectedness of the pleasure. They ate not just out of necessity, but with growing enthusiasm, turning the cobs in their hands, nibbling every last kernel clean. The ripple effect, food as a cultural bridge. The corn episode was a pivot point. It did not instantly erase fear or political allegiance, but it introduced a powerful element of doubt into their preconceived notions. If the Germans were so completely wrong about something as basic, as tangible, as food, what else might their propaganda have lied about or misrepresented? The corn became a catalyst for a subtle but significant shift in camp dynamics. The women began to observe their captors with new eyes. They saw that the Americans ate the same corn with evident enjoyment. It was not a punishment for prisoners, but a shared meal. This simple equality at the mess line was a quiet rebuttal to notions of deliberate degradation. Curiosity replaced contempt. The women started asking questions, often through gestures or broken phrases. Wie macht man das? How do you make this? They watched the cooking process, the grilling, the buttering. Food, the universal language, became a hesitant bridge. A GI might show how to properly hold a cob, or share a pinch of salt. These were tiny, non-political interactions, but in the context of war, they were profoundly humanizing. Other American foods further fueled this reassessment. Canned peaches in heavy syrup tasted like ambrosia. Fluffy white bread was a textural marvel. The sheer abundance, the fact that food was served regularly and in quantities that sated hunger, was a silent, powerful testament to America's industrial and agricultural might. It spoke of a nation not on the brink of collapse, but of one possessing seemingly limitless resources. This tangible evidence of American wealth and logistical power quietly dismantled the Nazi narrative of a decadent, weak foe. It suggested a reality far more formidable and complex. Aftermath, carrying the colonel home. The internment in American camps was often brief, a matter of weeks or months before transfer to Allied partners. But the memory of the corn, and the abundance it symbolized, lingered powerfully. When these women were eventually released and returned home, they faced a Germany in utter ruins, cities reduced to rubble, a shattered economy, and a pervasive hunger known as the Hunger Winter. The contrast between the American camps and the grim reality of post-war Germany could not have been starker. In this landscape of scarcity, the stories of American food took on an almost mythic quality. They described it to family and friends, the sweet, grilled corn, the miraculous white bread, the tinned fruits. Some tried to recreate the flavors, scavenging for whatever substitutes they could find. The corn story, in particular, became a family anecdote, a personal microhistory that contradicted the monolithic hatred of the enemy. More importantly, the experience planted a cognitive seed. It had demonstrated that the other, the enemy soldier, was not a monster but a human who ate, laughed, and shared food. He was someone who, in his own cultural context, enjoyed a grilled cob of corn on a summer day, just as a German might enjoy a potato pancake. This personal, sensory experience of a shared human pleasure, the enjoyment of a satisfying meal, proved more durable than years of abstract propaganda. It was a foundational, if subconscious, step towards the psychological demilitarization necessary for peace. Conclusion, the profound in the simple. The story of the German Kriegshelferinnen and the American corn cobs is far more than a curious footnote to the grand narrative of World War II. It is a potent allegory for cultural misunderstanding and the pathways to its resolution. In that bright yellow kernel, we see the collision of two agricultural traditions, two national identities, and two propaganda machines. The women's initial revulsion was not mere pickiness, it was the embodied result of a cultural indoctrination that defined what was civilized and what was not. Their subsequent acceptance and enjoyment represented a moment of cognitive liberation, a willingness to let direct experience override received dogma. It was a lesson learned not through a lecture or a policy, but through taste. This anecdote reminds us that while wars are fought over ideologies, resources, and territories, they are experienced by individuals through the prism of daily life, through fear, hunger, and unexpected kindness. The road to reconciliation is rarely paved solely with grand treaties and state ceremonies. Often, it is built brick by brick from these small, shared human moments, a smile, a gesture, a shared meal. Peace can begin not just at a negotiating table in Yalta or Potsdam, but on a makeshift bench in a temporary camp, with a woman cautiously tasting something new, discovering it is good, and in that discovery, beginning to see the world, and the enemy, anew. The corn cob, therefore, stands as a humble symbol. It symbolizes the shock of encounter, the fallibility of prejudice, and the transformative power of a simple, shared human experience. In the darkest hours of the 20th century, it offered a kernel of hope, a suggestion that even between enemies, common ground could be found, one bite at a time.